So, Callista Bisek, who is Newt Gingrich's, is it third, fourth wife? I'm not sure. And I wonder how long it'll be before she's shown the door, just like the rest of them. Advice, Callista, oh my God, don't get some sort of a potentially terminal disease, because then Newt will come into your hospital room and inform you that, he's moving on. But anyway, so Callista Bisek, her friends back home just couldn't get their brains wrapped around the idea that Callista, when she confessed to them, was having an affair, a sexual affair, in that pit of snakes and vipers, Washington, D.C., and she was having that sexual affair with a married man in violation of her Roman Catholicism. Ooh, how do you do that? Well, as mentioned previously, when you're a cafeteria Catholic, you can do that. You pick and choose, although I would think that, you're not picking and choosing from various offerings of the Catholic Church when you commit adultery. You are picking and choosing from direct orders from your God. Bit of a difference. Oh, well, it's all in the interpretation. Now, Callista and Newt have been married for 11 years. It's just that 6-year affair that is going to come up and bite Newt on his private parts. And I can't wait. Now, Newt has been traveling around, as you know. He's been going around the country, mea culpaing in front of all these half-baked, psychopathic religious leaders, most of them Protestant. Although I think, a few Catholics have gotten the Newt treatment. And of course, didn't they make a movie about his meeting with the Pope? Not a movie, but a film about Newt's meeting with Pope John Paul II. Now, I don't know it was about them meeting him. Maybe it was just a movie about him. But anything to suck up to the Catholic conservative vote, because, Catholic fundamentalists are a little bit less scorchingly vicious here in America than Protestant fundamentalists. And the Catholic fundamentalists might be a little bit more willing to accept the idea that a thrice married Newt Gingrich, disgraced in the U.S. House, an adulterer, serial adulterer himself, a liar, a man without honor, in other words, a typical Republican, is running for president. The Catholics might forgive him a little bit more quickly than the Protestants. The Catholics have more people to pray to. More gods and saints and spooks and haints and people that offer absolution, whereas the Protestants are kind of stuck with one. Okay, maybe two, but you get my drift. Now, if you look at the picture in the New York Times and see Callista Bisek staring transfixed at her kind of blurry husband, to me, like I said, it looks like the way my 1.5-year-old dog stares at me. Just that same kind of glazed over, oh God, lead me, feed me. Can I have a new bowl of water? Do we get to go for a walk at some point? Please. Oh, okay. I'll just sit here. No, I'm not. Oh, okay, I'll be very quiet. Can I just gaze at you? You're the leader. I swear to God, it's that look. But this is a Republican politician wife look to begin with. Think. Pat Nixon. Oh my God. Poor Pat Nixon. I'll tell you what, if there is any Republican politician's wife that I feel great and enormous pity for, it was Pat Nixon. Poor creature. Betty Ford. Now, I understand Betty Ford had some serious problems going on. When she would stare at Gerald, it was usually because she was in an alcoholic, just completely phased out. Look where? Look over there. Okay. So I'm not going to say anything about Betty Ford. Bless her heart. The sine qua non of dedicated Republican wives, of course, would be Nancy Reagan. The looks, until she started interpreting for him, the looks that she would give her husband were just, I don't know, beyond adulation, beyond heroic. They were more like, I don't know. And, of course, it's my understanding from reading the biographies that Nancy Reagan also was, you know, doing the adultery thing before she married him. Huh? No? And wasn't her father, what was her father? Her father, Davis, was he a preacher? Was he a businessman? I forget. It's immaterial to the story. What's her name? Who is the second Bush wife? No, George W. Yeah, Laura. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart. Laura Bush, who Kathy did an awful lot of good impressions of Laura Bush. Laura Bush was the same way. Laura Bush, it was fairly obvious, was on some kind of medication. But Laura Bush would stare at George in, you know, that look. There is one major exception, and we'll talk about that one when we come back. Callista Bisek had her picture on the front page of New York Times this morning, a.k.a. Callista Gingrich, because Newt is, can you stand the anticipation? Newt is going to make an announcement day after tomorrow about his plan to rescue America from ourselves. You see, the whole theme of the Newt Gingrich run for the presidency will be American exceptionalism. And according to the New York Times, Callista is on board with this. Her obvious devotion to her serial adultering husband transcends her own dedication to her Roman Catholic faith. Obviously, had that not been the case, she wouldn't have done what she did. I mean, it's very simple. Now, we're also talking about Callista in following the mold of dedicated Republican wives who where it concerns political candidates and or presidents. And as a few examples, of course, there's Pat Nixon, there's Betty Ford, there is the epitome of Republican politician wife dedication almost to the point of hypnotic insanity, and that, of course, would have been Nancy Reagan's devotion to Ronnie, up to and including the point where she would hear for him, translate for him, and you know, I guess cut up his hamburgers for him, which is good. I mean, this is what dedicated spouses do. So there's one exception to this, of course. You're way ahead of me. I know you are. But that, of course, would be George Herbert Walker Bush's wife, excuse me, Barbara, the one with retractable fangs. You remember Barbara, the one whose eyes would light up with a red, the whites of her eyes would turn red whenever she would, for example, talk to little refugee children at the Houston Astrodome. This is just like camp, isn't it? Huh? You could be back in New Orleans drowning, right? Did you lose your little dog? Aleister Crowley's daughter. You know. Barbara Bush was not the devoted sit-back. Barbara Bush let all of her men, her sons, her husband, and anyone in the two-county area who was of the male gender know that she carried a huge pair of pinking shears and was not hesitant in using them to cut things off when necessary. Now, they were obviously metaphorical pinking shears, but pinking shears nonetheless. So all of her sons, who were instructed, apparently, as was Ma Barker's sons, to go out and become successful, in a manner of speaking, all of her sons and her husband, I think it's pretty apparent if you look at the videos, look at the photographs, listen, lived in absolute, utter, frothing terror of this woman. I don't think I ever saw Barbara Bush sit there and stare affectionately at her husband like the devoted little puppy that Callista Bisek is. No, not Barbara Bush. No. She would stare at her husband waiting for a slip-up, and you could see her reaching into her enormous purse for the pinking shears. Well, okay, I could. Now you have the Democratic wives. Someone tell me that Hillary Clinton would sit there and stare devotedly at her husband. I don't think so. Tell me Michelle Obama stares devotingly at her husband. Tell me Bess Truman stared devotingly. Oh, I know where you're going. What about Jackie Kennedy? I don't think Jackie Kennedy stared devotedly at her husband. Lady Bird Johnson, I don't think she did either. Lady Bird knew she was married to a world-class war criminal and had to deal with that. I think Lady Bird Johnson probably was into self-medication on some level. I mean, when you're married to somebody who decides to murder 2 or 3 million people, I mean, that puts you in the class, that puts you above George W. Bush. That puts you right up. Now, I realize when LBJ was president, George Bush was running around Alabama trying to make himself invisible so he wouldn't have to go get shot at. But when you compare Republican wives and Democratic wives, and I'm talking about presidents' wives, I think you'll find that there are a couple of patterns there. So the picture in this morning's New York Times, I swear to God, when I first saw it, my first thought was, oh my God, it looks like my dog Rusty. You know, the look on Callista Bisek's face. But then I started thinking, just immediately on the heels of that thought, oh my God, there's a picture of Newt all fuzzed out with his pet wife. His pet wife. There she is. Well, in the Times article, it talks about all sorts of things. At Villanova University on a recent Thursday night, Mrs. Gingrich, that would be Callista Bisek, warmed up the audience for a showing of the couple's movie about Pope John Paul II by signing books and DVDs in her left-handed curlicue. That's what the Times says. Her left-handed curlicue. Ooh. Uh-oh. Editorializing. I'm sure the right wing will pounce on that word. Curlicue. First of all, they'll have to look it up. But when asked whether she was ready for the scrutiny a campaign would bring, she smiled tightly. Isn't that so, Republican wife? She smiled tightly and grew very silent. Are you ready for the scrutiny, Mrs. Gingrich, that this campaign is going to bring? After all, you married a serial adulterer with whom you committed adultery in, violation of your Roman Catholic faith. Do you have anything to say about that? Really, is that it? Tight-lipped and silent. Newt answered for her. He said, according to the Times, whether or not she's ready for the scrutiny a campaign would bring, he said, seems to be. We've talked about it for a year. It's difficult. Really, Newt? Is it difficult? Well, you're going to save America just like you saved West Georgia College and you saved your district back here in Georgia all those years ago. And, so I'm sure that Callista will rise to the occasion, so to speak. Now, the Times went on to say that Gingrich is well aware that social conservatives, those are the crazy people who dwell among us, social conservatives are skeptical of him because he did not emphasize their issues in Congress. And what are social conservatives' issues? Eliminate all gay people. Eliminate any sort of privacy or rights attendant to women's political reality. Invade anything that farts, if it farts upwind from the United States. Just your typical stuff. Keep the gays out of the military. Make sure that it's okay to carry a gun into a kindergarten class. And the teachers can if they want to also. Those are the social conservative issues. Oh, that's right. And also pay attention to that part of the Bible where Jesus says that capital gains are good and that, unionizing or organizing your workers out in the olive groves is bad. So, Oh, also, there's that little issue of all the divorces and the infidelities. But, these are Republican voters. They'll get over that. As long as Newt says, well, I don't think homosexuals are normal. The social conservatives will forgive him all of his abnormal, heterosexual, or is it abnormal, activity. Who's to say whose sexual activity is normal and whose is abnormal? Well, I'll tell you who's to say it. Religious nutballs. I don't care what religion they are. Religious nutballs will be the first ones to tell you whose sexual activity is proper and whose isn't. They don't call it the missionary position for nothing, truth seekers. So here we go. Newt Gingrich, day after tomorrow. Da-da. My God, I can hardly breathe. I have been waiting and waiting and waiting to hear my leader announce with his gorgeous helmet-headed blonde wife who stares at him with utter devotion, not unlike Rusty stares at me, is going to make the announcement that, yes, I, Newt Gingrich, will run for president with my gorgeous, blonde, helmet-headed wife as we march into the future, carrying aloft the sword of justice and the Bible and tax cuts for the wealthy. We're coming, America! We're coming! I'm coming to save you! And my wife! We're coming!